Hey guys, I'm learning TFT, back with another video where I'm going to talk about 4.2 augments and do a detailed breakdown on the categorization of the 4.2 augments, how you go about thinking around what type of augment to take as a follow-up to last time, and kind of doing a somewhat detailed breakdown of each augment and when you want to take them. Now, before I do that, I want to first address some stuff from this whole drama that's been happening that I haven't really talked about publicly. Relo guy said, no apologies, no public statements. And I really haven't addressed this because I didn't feel like I had anything particularly to say and felt like it wasn't necessarily my place to speak about this. And I didn't want to pour more fuel on the fire. But I feel like the whole situation has kind of calmed down a little bit. I've gotten a little bit more of a sense of where my role has been in this and what I've learned from it. And so I do want to kind of talk about this briefly. So if you want to just skip to the content, I'll provide timestamp in the description below and you can just jump ahead. And I put out a tweet to Waterpark Tactics that kind of summarizes my perspective. He made this point that even though, because he was kind of critical of me in this process, and he said even though I'm not 100% to blame, he still thinks that what I did was negligent and irresponsible. And here's kind of my high-level response to that, which is that I play TFT and create content as a hobby. This is not my career. I've been very fortunate where I'm pretty much semi-retired. I run a lifestyle business that's like an online passive income generating business that I'm fortunate that I can basically be semi-retired. I still do some work on that. I do some executive coaching for startup founders. I have 2 kids and a family, so TFT is not a full-time thing for me. And for me to be able to try to compete get to Challenger, be able to play in some tournaments every set, it takes a good amount of time. And creating content, if it was a full-time thing for me, would take a ton of time as well. And it's rare that a content creator can be both a really great content creator and perform at the top levels. And so it's just not feasible for me to be able to create content at that quality level that I know Waterpark Tactics, I respect him a lot. I really enjoy the content he puts together. And his content is much more planned out, much more scripted. And that's just not what motivates me. I view a lot of these videos, and I've said this from the beginning, that my videos are going to be a lot more unscripted, learning on the fly. Part of it is me teaching the material so I can learn the material better. But a lot of my motivation for creating content is that I want to share learnings from top level players with people who can't afford coaching as much. I feel like it's a way to even the playing field. And it's also a way that I feel like I can give back, not just from the perspective that like, hey, TFT is a game, like, well, am I really giving back that much? To me, the broader impact and why I love TFT as a game is that I believe TFT rewards players for learning, for growing, for challenging themselves, for throwing out what you thought you knew with each patch, with each set, and having to reinvent yourself, redefine yourself. And I feel like that's a perfect metaphor for life as a whole, especially in the technologically advanced society that we live in today, where AI and technology are just growing exponentially. And what works for you today is not going to work for you tomorrow. And again, I've been very fortunate that from a financial standpoint, I don't have to worry too much. But as AI continues to grow, who knows if within the next 10 years, AGI hits, or artificial general intelligence hits, if the singularity hits, if AI is able to replace more and more jobs. We as a human society have to constantly learn how to redefine ourselves, how to learn. And I feel like TFT is a perfect metaphor for that as a whole. And so when I am providing a lot of these videos, the underlying intent, and that's why I also do some of these talks and spiels in the beginning and provide quotes. If you've seen some of my more of my earlier videos, is I want to convey a philosophy for life. And it just happens that that philosophy for life is also what can make you a better TFT player. That is kind of the underlying approach. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But so that's why the approach of being very diligent and deliberate about scripting and editing, that approach just doesn't work for me. I have a family, I have 2 kids, limited time. If being able to edit videos at a really high level was a requirement for me to produce content, I would probably just stop producing content. And I've had a lot of people reach out to me. Let me zoom this in. Just in the comments on Discord saying they really appreciate the content, and people were concerned that I would stop producing content as a result of this whole drama that played itself out. And I don't want to really change my style to have a lot more time investment to edit content, because that's just not what I enjoy doing. I'm a 1-person content team, and even if I wanted to try to catch that DM reference, I don't think I would have, because someone commented shortly after the video posted referencing a timestamp to that part of the video, and I went there twice. And I didn't know what they meant. I was like, what are you talking about? I was just focused on Marcel's words. I was listening to the audio, because the thing that was on the screen was one line in a giant wall of text. And my videos are long form, and like my last video was 3 hours. So, and I know that Water Park Tactics mentioned that this was in the first minute of the video. And while that might be true, I'm not, when I'm watching a video through, and frankly, for most of my videos, I don't even watch the video before I publish it. Like, I'm just making sure it's not horrible, and I'm just clicking publish. And that's why, you know, some of you are saying like, hey, the audio is scuffed, or like there's something wrong with the video. Like, and I appreciate that feedback, and I'm learning in TFT just as I'm learning how to be a content creator. Part of my underlying goal for creating content here is I'm interested also in just later creating content to talk about how AI is changing the world and what that means for human society, and how we will live in a post. Well, anyway, I won't go all of that. Like, that's for another time. But I just don't enjoy editing videos that much, and I'm still learning. So that's what I'll say. I'm going to make mistakes. And I just am not going to catch like really small messages like that. So what I have learned is I should not include DMs in the videos. And the reason I had included Discord in that screen is because sometimes Marcel will send me links during our coaching session, and I'll just like click on them, like to a VOD, for example. So that was just something I had never thought would occur. I didn't even know that Marcel had messaged me that. And so, because I don't keep Discord notifications on my screen. So like, I didn't even know that that was there. It wouldn't have crossed my mind that he would have messaged me that. And to the people that are like, oh, like, why did learning TFT blur the video and then like cut out that first part? Just purely from a selfish standpoint, I don't want to damage my relationship with the coaches I work with. They're really generous in allowing me to record and share the sessions. I think that it helps them too. It helps them build a brand. Although like most of the coaches, like it helps them acquire clients. Although Marcel's like not even accepting other clients, like, because he's mostly using this coaching mentor program to like help himself learn as well. But like leaking that info would ruin that trust. And it's not my place. So I do want to say I don't support like black market stats or an unfair advantage that they give to top players. My goal in creating all of this content is to bridge that gap, is to share knowledge that is centralized in the top level players and make that broadly accessible to people who can't afford coaching, who can't afford to be in these study groups and elite discussion groups. I want to try to spread that information. That's why I'm producing these videos. And so I got some slack like, oh, you are part of the problem, and I am using unfair information. Like, I'm not. Like, that was one instance of a very indirect, accidental situation, and I don't want, if any of the coaches I'm working with have black market stats, I frankly don't really want to know that. Like, I don't support it. I don't think that they should be using it. Although I understand why they are, because to me, the problem is not the players. It's like, don't hate the player, hate the game. Like, when prohibition happened in the early 1900s, like, or cannabis is banned or psychedelics are illegal, like, people, it's just all gonna go underground. Like, stuff will happen. It's, to me, it seems just ignorant and just putting your head in the sand to assume that it's not going to happen, because the incentive structure, you have to think about the incentive structure. And so, like, while so then I'll talk about kind of like right here. Oh, so going back to why I like blurred it, like that is why I removed it, because I don't want my videos to be about like, oh, like, I'm a whistleblower and like leaking. I want people to just focus on the content. Like, that's not why I'm creating these videos, and that's why I blurred it. I don't want to leak, like, ruin trust, because if I leak stuff with coaches, nobody's gonna ever want to coach me again and record these videos. And frankly, a lot of people that are watching my videos, maybe you included, would get hurt by that. And so that was why I blocked it. Now, I do want to say that I messed up. I ideally would have caught that, but frankly, looking back, I don't know that I would have done anything differently. It was something that I just wasn't able to catch. And the big thing, actionable item that I'm going to do is I'm not going to include DMs in my videos anymore, just in case some shit goes down, even though, like, this is literally, out of all the coaching sessions that I've had, and I think I've probably had over 100 by this point, this is like the one time that something like this has happened. I've never had any coach before share with me like, oh, I have access to information I can't share with the public. And like, I didn't even know that Marcel had that relationship with Meta TFT. I know he was sponsored, but I didn't know, but anyway, so I'll talk briefly also about just Riot's policy. Like, and I was watching Brosiv's TFT, which, by the way, Brosiv, if you're watching this, you should. This was from my kids, by the way. They came up with the pun independently, and I shared this with the Pengu. And since I'm sick, I'm drinking hot water right now. But TFT. But I generally agree with Brosiv and other top challenger players that the augment stat removal has made top level players, including myself, and I'm probably like a tier above the top level, more creative, like think more critically about augments, and that's kind of why I want to do this analysis, which I didn't do before. If this was like previous set, I would just literally be looking at the stats, and I wouldn't be thinking about wins specifically, like certain categories of augments would make sense, why, what the nuanced situations you take something would be. But at the same time, I don't know what the solution here is. I just don't think that Riot can enforce this. Like, it, as people have mentioned, it's really not that hard of a technical problem, and Meta TFT already has access to this from their overlay. But like, even if you just scrape Twitch and like create a visual AI scraper that can capture like augment information on the screen and then correlate that with what placement you got, like, people, especially as prize pools rise, and if the game gets larger, which Riot should just assume it does, then it will incentivize more and more people to get access to black market stats. And so from a steady state standpoint, I just don't think it's very viable from a competitive standpoint to support this. Now, Riot may internally find that, hey, player retention and fun levels have gone up as a result of this. Although from a public sentiment standpoint, like, I don't know if that is true or not. It seems like it's not, but maybe the the actual engagement data across their player base shows something different. So yeah, it's just a very complex situation. But at the very least, Riot should be far more explicit about what is allowed and what is not allowed, because anomaly data wasn't explicitly stated as being disallowed. And I'm not saying that that justifies what Meta TFT and their sponsored players did with the data, but at the same time, like, I understand incentives motivate behavior, and so it's like people have said, it was bound to happen, and it likely will happen again. So personally, I feel like I enjoy the stats being removed, but because I don't see a solution to prevent players from being able to access this unless you like ban all public streams from occurring, which I think hurts the ecosystem as a whole, because I don't think you can actually police this and it just goes underground. I personally think the best steady state solution, especially as prize pools go up, is just make it public. I think this is just a failed experiment, but that's just my take. Okay, so before I get started on this too, and just kind of with the vibe of like what I'm trying to do with these videos and underlying the surface in what I want to convey, and I've talked about this before, is learning how to learn is the key. That this is like really the essence of both TFT and how to be a great player and how to succeed in life. Yuval Noah Harari said, most important of all will be the ability to deal with change, learn new things, and preserve your mental balance in unfamiliar situations. Peter Drucker, an management consultant, one of the best of all time, said, the only skill that will be important in the 21st century is the skill of learning new skills. Everything else will become obsolete over time. And these are all ideas that I emphasize with my executive coaching clients. I've coached clients who, like one client who's ran a CEO of $1 billion company, many like Series A to C companies. And this is like really the key thing, because just as it's true for a startup and a founder, as you continue to grow and scale a company, you face new challenges. In TFT, as you get new patches, new sets, you constantly have to reinvent yourself. What you thought you knew becomes stale, and you have to kind of unlearn what you thought you knew and learn new things. And a big part of that is your mental balance, is being able to, what I talk to my kids about, if you flip your lid, if you go on a lose streak or something, you get a low roll, or more dog throws you a low roll, preserving your mental balance, flipping your lid is like going on tilt and figuring out how to calm down and learn from what happened instead of ignoring your mistakes and making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Yuval also said here, in order to keep up with the world of 2050, and I think this will probably be more like 2030, it's already happening right now. Like a lot of CS computer science students from like Stanford and Berkeley can't even get entry-level jobs now, because AI can help mid-level engineers code so much more effectively and efficiently and productively that they can produce at like 3 to 5x, and top level engineers can produce at like 10x what they could before. And so you just don't need to hire as many people. And so you really have to invent new ideas and products, but above all, to reinvent yourself again and again, because the world and environment is changing so rapidly. You have to constantly look within yourself instead of blaming outside. And that's why a lot of times you hear on streams top players say like, I suck, or they suck, but like more importantly, I suck. And it's just that idea, not necessarily internalizing it from a shame or guilt perspective, but just saying like, I'm a beginner, adopting a beginner's mindset and saying there is always more for me to learn. And so this is the core of what this channel is all about and what I want to pass on to you, the viewer. And so a lot of that is disguised in this, but that's also why in a lot of my coaching sessions, I am constantly asking questions of like how, not just, it's like the saying of, don't just teach someone how to fish, teach them how to fish. So so this goes to the exact leak that happened. We were talking about Camille's anomalies in VOD reviewing a game, and we were talking about like, okay, well, this anomaly seems okay, and that anomaly seems not so good. And then Marcel was like, oh, I know this anomaly is good. And a big part of it is like when you're watching any video or when you're listening to a streamer, or if you're just watching my videos and I make a statement of like, this is good or this is bad, instead of just accepting that statement, which is like eating a fish that someone hands to you, it's to always ask why, right? Like that's going back to the learning how to learn. Always ask why, because if you can understand how someone learns, then you don't need to rely on them to hand you fish anymore. You can go get the fish yourself. And so I was asking Marcel, how did you come to that conclusion of that anomaly being good? Like, what was your process? What's your learning process? And so that was what led down this whole rabbit hole of like explosion. But I really want to drive that home, that that is the underlying thing. And when you're watching these videos too, I love questions like that. If you have any questions, or again, I also am not perfect in a lot of these analysis. If there's anything I get wrong or you think I got wrong or an alternate viewpoint, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments or ask questions. How did I come to that? What's my process for producing this type of analysis? So with that said, let's actually jump into it. So I previously came up with a video about 4-2 augment selection and the importance of speed on that. So I won't dive into that. I'll provide a link in the description to that video. But the key idea is that items in econ are stronger in early game. Combat's going to be stronger in the late game. And you ideally want to figure out, like let's say at 3-7 or 4-1, figure out what augment distribution of category of item you picked in the early game, so that you can really quickly filter augments at 4-2, especially if you're going a fast 8 strategy, because you want to be able to roll quickly and ideally before your opponents if you're contested, like let's say Black Rose Heimer in this patch. If you want your Elises and your Garens and your Heimers, you got to roll early. Otherwise, if you roll late, let's say you take too long on 4-2, you don't even roll until 4-3, like all your units you want are going to be taken out of the unit pool and you're just going fast 8 instead of fast 8. So what I did here in this analysis is for each silver gold prismatic tier broke down by type of augment, and then we can kind of talk about, and I won't go into detail and everything, but like kind of broad strokes, like when it's useful. One thing you'll notice is that just from a silver, gold, and prismatic standpoint, there are way more team combat augments at the gold tier than there are at prismatic and silver. And there are also way more trait, I didn't even count this, but trait augments you could basically view as team combat. Because usually if you get a trait augment, you're going to play the vertical mostly. But you can kind of view it as like a partial team combat. So we'll start with silver. And let me pull up. Let me see if you can see this. Okay. Yeah, I think you can still see this here. So backup is your team gains 10% attack speed if at least 4 allies start combat in the back 2 rows. If you can still see this. Okay. So this breaks even with pumping up at 2-5, and then it's worse. So for the most part, this is going to not be that great. It's really, if you really want attack speed, so it's going to be better for like Twitch or Corki as a backline. And attack speed helps AP units generate mana, but it's going to be less effective. Blistering Strikes is anti-heal. It does seem like there's more healing this set, and if you're playing against melee carries in the late game, so if you're playing against a Powder 4, a Camille 3, Mbessa, Vi, anti-heal is going to be extremely important. So if you don't have anti-heal built already, this could be takeable. And keep in mind that Rumble and Powder also have anti-heal, though Powder is going to be a lot less consistent. Rumble can be like reasonably consistent if you just stick him in the middle. Bulky Buddies is good for melee comps, also because it gives you HP and shield. Also good with Bruisers and Sentinels since they both really benefit. Bruiser scale with HP. Sentinels already have a bunch of armor magic resist, so the HP gives them far more effective HP than it would in other like kind of frontliners. And this kind of level is comparable to Exiles from previous set. Climb the Ladder is kind of like it's the augment that like as units die from, I think it was like 2 sets ago, you get a bunch of stats. But this time it's only with shared traits, so that's going to be better for vertical comps. So like 7 Rebel or Dominators, Pit Fighters. Melee units are going to benefit more from all the stats, the AD/AP, and the tankiness. So like Pit Fighters will benefit from that. Erosion basically shreds over time, every 2 seconds. So this is really good if you have a strong front line. So if you have a super tank, 6 sentinel, basically vertical tank traits are going to be good. And because you want a strong front line and this takes time, it works really well if you have a scaling backline champion. So like Heimer, Dominators scale with AP. Heimer's casts get more missiles. And then if you have like Archangel or Rageblade, it just sticks with the game plan of playing a long scaling front to back fight. Health is wealth. This one's getting nerfed in the next patch. A lot of the power budget is in the healing, and it's similar to Row Rejuvenation from last patch. Backline access is higher this set, so it doesn't have to be just melee. Like Row Rejuvenation was mainly played with melee, but this set there's a lot of backline access. Like Zoe can like hit the backline, Heimer can kind of hit the backline, Elise like with all her spiders can kind of hit the backline. Mordekaiser like can kind of pull. Yeah, just a lot of units that can access backline. So even if you put this on your backline to just get a little health, or like even Singed Hero Augment, he like runs around. So this is just a very solid generic augment, especially if you don't have like Gunblade on your backliner. Item Collector gives you HP, AD, AP, and it's particularly good on encounters with extra items. It's good if you're playing it with scrap. So if you picked a bunch of item augments early on, you're on an encounter with components. I'm not sure if the scrap... So if you scrap a component and it becomes a full item, I don't know if that counts as a full item here. If you do know how that works, like, love it if you could leave a comment. So these are the team combat silvers. Partial team combat is not on the whole team. So this units that start combat in the back row basically start at 20% less health but gain damage amp. So this is good if you already have like Gunblade or some type of healing. If you have this with health as wealth, for example, then that HP loss in the backline isn't too bad. Also better for like Scrap or Enforcer or Dominator, since they start with a shield, so that HP loss won't be as bad. Like if someone does have backline access, your backliner isn't as squishy. Lineup. This is particularly good for melee. It gives you armor, magic resist. Good with keepers, although I don't think... Is keeper still in the game? No. But basically good with like shielding. So good with shields, so like Scrap, Enforcers, Dominators. Not good with Sentinel since they already have a lot of armor magic resist. But because you want to put a lot of units in the front 2 rows, it's going to be better for melee. Mana flow. Units that start in the back get more mana per attack. So this is really good with Visionary, good with Dominator since it increases their AP generation and sorcerers, and makes attack speed better. So it's kind of like set 12 Scholars. Rageblade becomes more viable if you have mana flow. Also makes Gnasher's Tooth quite reasonable on your AP carry. Mentorship gives attack speed and HP to units that are next to a higher cost ally. And in the next patch with the introduction of 6 costs, this should actually get quite a big buff or boost because now you can actually buff your 5 costs with mentorship. Single unit, these are not gonna be too common. Very situational. Items. For the most part, items in econ you rarely are going to take because I talked about this in my previous video, but early game items are more impactful because as a percentage of the items you have, it's a higher percentage, so the impact is higher. Late game, you have way more items, so getting one more item is going to be far less impactful compared to having a team-wide combat. So I won't go into these in detail. I'm really kind of focusing on the team-wide combat. So at the gold level, bad luck protection. You see, you can still see this, yeah. Just seems like not that great. It's rare that you don't want crit, like Draven, maybe. Bronze for life. Damage amp for each bronze tier, so you want a lot of active traits. So Twitch Black Rose can give you a lot of traits. Where's that? This one. So this one gives you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 traits. And I'm not sure what other comps. If you happen to know what other comps are good for Bronze for Life, love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Bulky Buddies, we already talked about. Clockwork Accelerator is good for stall comps. You get scaling attack speed over time. So you want like a really strong front line. So this is also probably reasonable with like 6 Bruiser Twitch. Twitch wants the attack speed and 6 Bruisers, you have a lot of front line. Crowns will not that great. Like if the lobby is very AD heavy, then that 10 armor may be a little bit better. Like okay if you need a rod, but not that great. Health is Wealth, we already talked about. Inspiring Epitaph, just like a very strong generic augment, gives you shield and attack speed. Item Collector we talked about. Mace's Will is good for ambushers. Get more crit basically. Mana Flow we talked about. Noble Sacrifice. Worse than Unified Resistances, but the thing is, like, it can work with Vertical Sentinel, but Vertical Sentinel you already have a bunch of armor magic resist, so you don't necessarily want more of it. So it's just kind of seems like a very mid augment. Overheal gives you damage and Omnivamp. Good for melee carries usually. Piercing Lotus gives you crit and shred, so usually better if you have like dual AD AP and you don't have some type of shred already. So like big question is like what comps does that really fit into? It's kind of very situational. Powered shields, units get durability when they're shielded, and you get extra shield when they fall under 50%. So these are all the units in the game that shield right now, and the traits that shield. So quite good with Scrap, Dominators, Enforcers. Saw Weijin take this with the Urgot reroll, since Urgot's Experiment does shield. Broken with Domination. It's Domination again. Oh yeah, they get a shield. Whenever they get a kill, all Dominators gain 100 shield. Yeah, that definitely sounds broken. Also, these items all have shields. Light Shield Crest and Moonstone renew the shields, so that's pretty strong. Locket. These are like kind of more individual unit shields, so not as strong. But quite situational, I would say. If Blitz reroll becomes a thing, I suspect that this would be quite good on him. And if Loris at some point reroll becomes a thing, that could be good. Sated Spellweaver. After casting ability, gain Omnivamp, XX healing. So you want units that cast a lot, low mana melee. So like Camille would be reasonable with that. Sniper's Nest, good with snipers. Better in the late game. I'm not sure if previous rounds fought from the same start hex affect it. If you happen to know that, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Like, for example, if your Kog'Maw was on like a corner hex for 5 rounds and you didn't move it before you selected the augment, does it benefit from that? Spears will AD and mana, good for AD casters. So all of these units. And then Spirit Link, team restores percent max health and increases if you have lower HP. This is also good with Chem Baron, especially if you get like at higher cash outs, since you get HP from skipping the Chem Baron cash outs. And good with vertical bruisers and sentinels. All right, so that's gold team combat. Partial team combat. I'm not gonna go too much into detail. A lot of these trait specific ones are like just not too useful most of the time. Let's see, what's unique? Little buddies. Blazing Soul is good for AP and attack speed. All right, let's just focus. I don't want this video to be too long. There's a lot of trait specific ones that also benefit. Oh, emblems. Yeah, let's talk about emblems really quick, since at 4-2, you kind of want to know what your max cap trait chase traits are. So if you are at 4-2 at gold, it can often be times if you already have 1 emblem or 2 emblems, or you're playing on Wandering Trainer, or you maybe picked the Wandering Dummy at 2-1. It's good to know which ones you need +2 in, maybe +3 in, and that way you can really go for max cap. One thing I'll call out is specifically Rebel Crest. You just need 2 of them to get to 10 Rebel. And if you have 1 of them from an emblem, like the, what was that, the Tower Dummy that gives you a random emblem, or you're on encounter with an emblem on a dummy, then you can get to 10 Rebel at level 9, which is similar to Portal, 10 Portal from set 12. So if you already have a Rebel emblem, you should almost always try to get Rebel Crest, because that's huge. So I put here Oh, by the way, this is like a image of all of the craftable emblems, and I'll hopefully try to remember to put a link in the description. I did post it on my Twitter. Here. So I'll try to post more of these like resources onto my Twitter, so like you could easily reference them if I forget to do it in these videos. Or if I forget, you can also just comment in the description, and I'll try to respond to your comments. So these are what you should really be thinking about. So Rebel, I would call out. Family, if you can get to 5 family, can be quite good since you can start getting cash outs. Hit Fighter +2, Black Rose +2, both strong. Artillerist is getting a buff, so I don't know how strong 6 will be. And if you can get these, then these are like the prismatic chase traits that you can like win out with. These are gonna be less valuable, though it kind of really depends on who the best holders are. I did like a really scuffed analysis of the best emblem holders, like who have really big shifts in placement when they're holding these specific emblems. This is for 1423C, like early on. So I haven't really updated this, but can be quite useful just like as a reference. And I suspect I'll need to redo this analysis. All right, so oh, another thing to note is for items like teaming up or support cash, these can kind of serve as partial team combat equivalents. I just categorize them under items, but depending on what support item you get, it could be like full team combat, like Moonstone, for example, or it could be like kind of partial team combat. And usually you want to avoid econ unless you're like close to hitting a 3-star. Maybe if you're so reinforcement, if you're contested, like let's say you're playing Black Rose Heimer and you already slammed Boo Buff and you're contested 4 ways, sometimes it could be worth it to take reinforcement so that you can kind of prevent the contest drought. Malicious monetization. This one, how does it work again? You get gold for enemies killed. So this is good if you're really strong relative to the lobby. So reroll, if you already hit all your reroll, could be strong. And it could help you get to fast 9 if you're like really strong. I believe I did this math. I'm not sure if I did it completely correct, but 50 gold, 4 gold upside, which, what is that compared to invested plus plus? I mean, invested plus plus, you could use it to go fast 9 too, which is 45 gold. So if you got the full value from this, which you won't always, and this also assumes everyone in your pool is at 8 units, which some people might be at level 7, like if they're still re-rolling and like pushing levels. And it's only enemy champions, so it's not like Scion doesn't count or dummies don't count. But this could be good value if you're streaking and you can play for a fast 9 first. So it's very situational. A golden find, same kind of deal. You get scaling gold for it. It's good for reroll to hit as well, since you get the 10 free rerolls. You won't get the gold value until after the anomaly round. So this is usually going to be better probably for 2 or 3 cost reroll, not necessarily 1 cost reroll. Since ideally with 1 cost reroll, you want to have hit by 4-2 anyway, so the rerolls aren't as valuable. Okay. So Prismatic. So again, Prismatic has way fewer just team combat compared to Gold. and they're all stuff that we've already seen. Bronze for Life's kind of hard to find comps that work with it. Piercing Lotus isn't great unless you need dual shred. Bulky Buddies is like similar to Giant and Mighty and probably reasonably strong. So like this is probably really the like best generic. So it's like you might not even say this is 3. And then partial team combat, like these trait ones are very specific. So Blazing Soul, good for scaling. So this one you need to have a really strong front line since it repeats. But it's also like AP and AD, so it's just kind of an awkward augment because if you're scaling front to back, usually your backliner doesn't benefit from both the AP and AD. And if you're playing melee, let me see if I had the notes here. If you're playing melee, then a lot of times you're not going to be able to get that much scaling value on repeating it on more allies, since most of those allies are going to die. So I would say this is almost more of like a single unit combat, or like 2 to 3 at most. Since if you're playing it front to back, your units don't benefit as much. So I feel like this is just like kind of a meh augment as a result of that. Calculated enhancement. Champions in back row gain AD and AP for the same reason as that. You waste one of the damage types usually. Better for melee, but then you kind of have to like have them walk up. So I don't know. Do you really want to backline your melee carry? So same reason, it's like kind of awkward to play. Trifecta really depends on how good recosts are. Might be decent on the why not both the shapeshifter augment, especially in the next patch. Swain and Gangplank are getting buffed. I think the melee versions. And the Prismatic performed better than the gold in PvE stats. This also has a team-wide attack speed, so it's actually, you could say that this is, put this into team combat is attack speed. But it's really about reroll lines. So Gangplank, Swain, there's maybe like Loris and, here, let's just pull up Team Builder. There might be at some point that like Loris TF, since they're both enforcers, reroll could be a thing. There is a Rennie, Nunu, and Gangplank reroll that like Dish Soap played. It's good for also with the Rennie hero augment. Could do Swain, GP, Nami, like the Swain, Nami, Emissary reroll. Seems like with the Dominator and I forget if Automata was buffed, but the Dominator buffs, Blitz Kog'Maw reroll might be a thing, and then also Blitz Cassio might be a thing. And then right now there's still the Scar Kog'Maw reroll, but unclear if that just gets nerfed to the ground. Yeah, these seem like most of the reroll options. As you can also say, there could be like a Smeech Rennie with Chembaron. So yeah, Trifecta really just depends on how good the reroll lines are, but it's also 3. I believe it's 3 of the units get the buff, so it's like better with trios. Whereas some of these are more like duo 3-cost carries. All right, let's see. Anything else to call out? Invested plus plus we kind of talked about, you could use it to go fast 9. In the beginning, when I first saw this, I was thinking, oh, I should preserve this to get reroll value, which you could for a little bit if you are playing from way ahead, like you have 80 plus HP at 4-2 because you were full streaking. And then you could just like kind of wait a little bit to go 9 on like 4-5 or even 5-1 if you can just sack stage 4. But usually you just want to go fast 9 with this instead of relying on it for reroll. On 3-2, you'll use it more for reroll. Max cap is if you're already playing like a reroll line, this is especially good for 3-cost reroll. Since you want to be at level 7 anyway, and you want a lot of gold. So good for top 4. Upward mobility, I don't know if this is wrong here. It seems like really bad at 4-2. Since you already, yeah, it doesn't even make sense at 4-2. There's a lot of item augments at the prismatic level. And again, items are usually going to be less good later in the game. Artifactory, maybe decent. But usually it's easier to play Artifactory. Like, I think, my experience is from 3-2, because you can kind of, as you get items, like, decide whether you want to convert them or not. Whereas the fact that you have to wait around to bench completed items at 4-2, I think makes it a lot harder to play. And you could just end up with items that aren't as good. So 3-2, if you like 4-2, your board is a lot more committed. And so because you also have to wait around, and usually you do your roll down on 4-2 if you're going fast 8. If you get like an item that like an artifact that really needs to change your direction of your units and comp to take advantage of that artifact, you can do that a lot easier at 3-2. It's much harder to do at 4-2. Coronation. In a tactician's crown, kind of like Triforce. Pretty solid. Final polish gives you a support item, so any of these that give you support items, flurry of blows. This is particularly good with ambushers, because ambushers already have crit. Immovable object. What else? Yeah, I guess mainly these 3 give you support items, so you can kind of view them as partial team combat. Radiant, you can view as single unit combat since it makes your carry or tank like a lot stronger. Tomb Raider 2 is like pretty bad, a lot worse than the gold version since like I think comparing this to this one, it's just the first 3 players. But this assumes that you are going, what, top 5 to get more value than Tomb Raider 2 or Tomb Raider 1. And you can never get the value of the second place getting knocked out if you're first place. So it's really the 3rd through 5th players. And again, like each incremental item decreases in value in the late game. So it's like really not that valuable. Sponging is particularly good with scrap. Gets like a whole ton of shield value. And yeah, I think that covers most of the ones that I want to call out. So high level of this is that you want to really focus ideally on, and this depends on if you're playing for like first or if you just need to preserve placements. If you need to preserve placements, then sometimes you won't be able to greed a team combat. You just go for what's good enough. But most of the time, you can use these categorizations to really quickly decide what to roll and what to keep on your 4-2 augment selection. And the big thing to also keep in mind is that at the gold level, you have way more team combat options than you do at the prismatic and silver options. All right, with that said, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you found it useful. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.